The leak started small, just a drop on the dining table. But that single drop led me to the truth buried beneath my own floor. Houston suburbs, quiet morning sunlight. Dora Miller, 69, retired school teacher, watches water fall from her ceiling, calls a plumber, Ricardo Medina, the man her son recommended. But what he finds isn't a broken pipe. It's a hidden device, thin tubes, colored liquids, digital timers, all leading to the air vent above Dora's bed. Ma'am, he says quietly, someone's been poisoning your air. That someone isn't a stranger. It's the family she trusted, her own son and daughter, drowning in debt, desperate for inheritance. What follows isn't just survival, it's a quiet war fought in whispers, proof and breath itself. Because sometimes the most dangerous place is the one that once felt safe to breathe in. Before we begin today's story, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Now let's get started. The morning light fell soft across the lawns of suburban Houston. Shadows from oak trees stretched over trimmed hedges and quiet driveways. It was the kind of stillness that made neighbors feel safe. Inside her two-story home, Dora Miller moved through the kitchen with practiced ease. She was 69, small-framed, with silver hair pulled back in a low bun. Her hands were steady as she poured coffee into a white ceramic mug. The house smelled faintly of lavender soap and old wood. Everything had its place here. Everything felt known. She carried the mug toward the dining table, her slippers shuffling softly against the hardwood floor. The table sat beneath a wide window that overlooked the backyard. Sunlight pooled on the polished surface. She set the mug down and reached for her reading glasses. Then she heard it. A drip. Slow. Rhythmic. Deliberate. Dora looked up. A dark stain spread across the ceiling above the table, shaped like a bruise. Water gathered at its center, swelling into a droplet. It hung there for a moment. Then it fell. The sound was soft but unmistakable. Drip. She stepped back, tilting her head. The stain was wider than she first thought. The edges were uneven, darker in some places. She touched the edge of the table. Dry. She looked up again. Another drop fell, landing near her mug. Her chest tightened. Not fear exactly. More like the feeling that something had gone wrong without warning. She walked to the kitchen and picked up her phone. Her fingers moved slowly over the screen. She found her son's name and tapped it. The phone rang twice. Mom? Martin's voice came through, warm but distracted. Everything okay? There's a leak, Dora said. Her voice was calm. She always spoke calmly. Above the dining table. It's spreading. Martin paused. She could hear papers rustling in the background. He was at work, probably. Always at work. A leak? He repeated. Did you check the upstairs bathroom? Not yet, she said. I just saw it. Okay. Don't touch anything. His tone shifted. Firmer now. I'll call Ricardo. He's good with this stuff. He'll come by this morning. Are you sure? Dora asked. She didn't like troubling people. Maybe I can just... Mom. Martin's voice softened. Let Ricardo handle it. He's reliable. I trust him. She nodded, though he couldn't see it. All right. I'll text you when he's on his way, Martin said. Just sit tight, okay? The call ended. Dora set the phone down and looked back at the ceiling. The stain seemed larger now. Water dripped again, steady as a heartbeat. She moved her mug to the counter and wiped the table with a dishcloth. The water left faint rings on the wood. She pressed the cloth against them until they faded. Then she sat in the living room and waited. 40 minutes later, a white van pulled into the driveway. The engine cut off. A door opened and closed. Footsteps moved toward the front porch. Dora stood and smoothed her cardigan. She opened the door before the bell rang. The man on her porch was maybe 50, with dark hair graying at the temples. He wore a navy work shirt with his name stitched on the chest, Ricardo Medina. His toolbox sat beside him. He smiled, polite and professional. Mrs. Miller Hidekinama said. Yes, Dora replied. You must be Ricardo. That's right. He nodded toward the house. Your son said you've got a leak? In the dining room, she said, stepping aside. Above the table. Ricardo picked up his toolbox and followed her inside. His boots were clean but worn. He moved carefully like someone used to entering strangers' homes. He didn't touch anything unnecessarily. Dora led him to the dining room and pointed up. Ricardo set his toolbox down and looked at the ceiling. His eyes narrowed. He didn't say anything at first. Just studied the stain, tracing its edges with his gaze. How long's it been dripping? He asked. I noticed it this morning, Dora said. Maybe an hour ago. He nodded slowly. Then he walked to the wall and ran his hand along the seam where the ceiling met the corner. His fingers paused. He pressed gently. The drywall gave slightly. Feels soft, he said. Water's been here a while. Dora's stomach turned. A while? Could be days, Ricardo said. Maybe longer. Hard to say without looking upstairs. He glanced at her. His expression was calm, reassuring. Mind if I check the bathroom above this? Of course, Dora said. Second door on the left. Ricardo climbed the stairs, his boots heavy on each step. Dora stayed below, arms crossed. She heard him moving around up there. A faucet turned on. Pipes groaned. The sound of cabinet doors opening and closing. Then silence. He came back down a few minutes later. His face was unreadable. Pipes look fine, he said. No leaks in the bathroom. Seals are good. Dora frowned. Then where's it coming from? Ricardo didn't answer right away. He crouched beside his toolbox and pulled out a flashlight. He clicked it on and aimed the beam at the ceiling. The light caught the edges of the stain. He tilted his head, following the pattern. Ma'am, he said quietly, can I check your basement? Something in his tone made her pause. It wasn't just professional anymore. It was careful. Too careful. The basement? She repeated. Yeah, medio wondering. He looked at her. His jaw was tight. Just want to rule something out. Dora nodded slowly. It's through the kitchen. Door on the right. Ricardo stood and walked toward the kitchen. Dora followed a few steps behind. He opened the basement door. A cool draft rose from below, carrying the smell of concrete and old cardboard. The stairs creaked under his weight as he descended. Dora stood at the top, her hand on the doorframe. The light from the kitchen barely reached the bottom step. She heard Ricardo moving around down there, his footsteps slow, deliberate. Then they stopped. Silence stretched long and thin. Mr. Medina, Dora called. Her voice sounded small. No answer. She heard him exhale. A sharp breath. Then his footsteps again, faster this time. He climbed the stairs quickly, his face pale under the kitchen light. His hands trembled slightly as he set the flashlight on the counter. Ma'am, so he said. His voice was tight. There's something down there. Dora's chest constricted. Something? Ricardo nodded. He wiped his palms on his jeans. A device. Tied into your air system. Tubes, tanks, timers. Dora stared at him. Her mind reached for something logical. Something normal. You mean a purifier? Ricardo shook his head. Slow. Definite. No, ma'am. He looked at her directly. His eyes were serious. Afraid even. This thing could be slowly poisoning you. The words hung in the air between them. Heavy. Final. Dora didn't move. She couldn't. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly. The light too bright. Her pulse thudded in her ears. Ricardo's hands were still shaking. The silence stretched between them. Ricardo's words hung in the air like smoke. Dora stared at him, her hands gripping the edge of the kitchen counter. Her knuckles were white against the granite. Poisoning me? The words felt strange in her mouth. Unreal. Ricardo nodded slowly. His face was pale, but his voice stayed steady. Ma'am, you need to pack some things. Just essentials. We should get you outside. Dora's chest tightened. She looked around the kitchen. The coffee maker sat on the counter, still warm. Her reading glasses lay folded beside the morning paper. Everything looked exactly as it had an hour ago. But now it felt different. Contaminated somehow. I don't understand, she said quietly. I know. Ricardo's voice was gentle. But right now we need to get you somewhere safe. Fresh air. Dora's eyes moved to the dining room. The table where she ate every meal. The chairs where her husband used to sit, reading the paper while she cooked breakfast. The sideboard held their wedding photos. 43 years of marriage captured in silver frames. This is my home, she whispered. Ricardo stepped closer. Not too close. Respectful. Yes, ma'am. And we're going to figure this out. But first, you need to be safe. Dora's mind reeled. She thought about the morning. The way she'd felt when she woke up. Heavy. Tired. She'd blamed it on poor sleep. But now other things came back to her. The headaches that had started 3 months ago. Dull, persistent. The dizziness when she stood too quickly. The exhaustion that never seemed to lift, no matter how much she rested. Her doctor had said it was normal. Aging, he'd called it. The body slowing down. But what if it wasn't? She pressed her hand to her forehead. The headache was there now, throbbing behind her eyes. Had it been there all morning? She couldn't remember. How long, Atunda, she asked her. Ma'am? How long do you think this thing has been running? Ricardo shifted his weight. Hard to say. Could be weeks. Maybe months. Months. The word hit her like a punch. She thought about all the mornings she'd struggled to get out of bed. The afternoons when even simple tasks felt overwhelming. The way food had started tasting strange, metallic. Her phone buzzed against the counter. She picked it up. Martin's name flashed on the screen. Hello? Her voice sounded far away, even to herself. Mom, how's it going with Ricardo? Martin's voice was rushed, distracted again. Dora looked at Ricardo. He was watching her carefully. He found something, she said slowly. What kind of something? The leak? No. Dora paused. The words felt impossible to say. A device. In the basement. Silence on the other end. Then Martin's voice sharper now. A device? Attached to the air system, Dora said. He thinks someone's been... She couldn't finish the sentence. Mom, listen. Martin's tone changed. Firm. Almost commanding. Don't call anyone else, okay? Don't call the renovation guys. They'll just try to rip you off. Let Ricardo handle it. Dora frowned. Something in his voice felt wrong. Too quick. Too defensive. But Martin, I'm serious, Mom. These contractor types, they see an old lady living alone, and they smell money. Ricardo's honest. He'll take care of it. The line went quiet. Dora stared at the phone. Martin had hung up without saying goodbye. That wasn't like him. He always said goodbye. Always told her he loved her. Ricardo was still watching her. Everything okay? Dora set the phone down. Her hands were shaking now. He said not to call anyone else. Your son? Yes. She looked at Ricardo. He said to let you handle it. Ricardo's expression darkened. Ma'am, this isn't something I can handle alone. We need to call the police. Maybe the fire department. Dora's mind spun. Why would Martin tell her not to call anyone? It didn't make sense. Unless a memory surfaced. 2 years ago, the plumbing renovation in the basement. New pipes, new fixtures. Martin had insisted on overseeing the work himself. He'd been here every day talking to the contractors, checking their progress. The renovation, she said quietly. Ma'am? 2 years ago, Martin supervised a plumbing renovation down there. She pointed toward the basement door. He knew every pipe, every connection. Ricardo's face went very still. Your son supervised the work? Dora nodded. Her stomach twisted. He wanted to make sure it was done right. Said he didn't trust contractors to work unsupervised. Ricardo was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up his flashlight. Ma'am, I need to go back down there. Take some pictures. Maybe get a sample of whatever's in those tanks. Should I come with you? No. His voice was firm. You stay up here. Better yet, step outside. Get some fresh air. Dora wanted to argue. This was her house. Her basement. But the look on Ricardo's face stopped her. He was scared. Really scared. She watched him disappear down the basement stairs again. His footsteps were careful, deliberate. She heard him moving around down there. The click of a camera. The sound of something being unscrewed. She walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the backyard. The grass was green and thick. The oak tree cast deep shadows across the lawn. Everything looked peaceful. Normal. But she felt like a stranger looking at someone else's life. The basement door creaked. Ricardo emerged holding a small plastic bag. Something dark swirled inside it. He sealed the bag carefully and set it on the counter. What is it? Dora asked. Liquid from one of the tanks. His voice was grim. Needs to be tested. But it doesn't smell like anything good. He pulled out his phone and started taking pictures of the basement door, the kitchen, the ceiling stain. Each flash made Dora flinch. The pipes, he said, not looking up from his phone. They don't connect to the main air system. Just one vent. Which one? Ricardo met her eyes. Your bedroom. The words hit her like cold water. Her bedroom. Where she slept every night. Where she'd been waking up exhausted and sick for months. Whoever did this, Ricardo continued quietly, they knew your house inside out. They knew which room was yours. They knew how to access the basement without you noticing. Dora's legs felt weak. She gripped the counter again. Only my children have keys. The words came out as a whisper. She hadn't meant to say them, but once they were out, they hung in the air like an accusation. Ricardo didn't respond. He didn't need to. Dora looked around the kitchen again. The coffee maker. The paper. The photos in the dining room. Everything that had felt like home an hour ago now felt foreign. Dangerous. For the first time in 40 years, she was afraid of her own house. I think, she started then stopped. Her voice was barely audible. I think I'd like to go outside now. Ricardo nodded. Good idea. Dora walked to the front door on unsteady legs. She turned the handle and stepped onto the porch. The Texas sun hit her face warm and clean. She took a deep breath. The air outside tasted different. Fresh. Untainted. She hadn't realized how long it had been since she'd breathed clean air. Ricardo followed her out, carrying his toolbox and the plastic bag. He closed the door behind them, but didn't lock it. They stood on the porch together, squinting in the bright sunlight. What happens now? Dora asked. Ricardo looked at the house, then back at her. Now we find out who wanted to hurt you. Dora's hands trembled as she pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. The morning had started with a simple leak. Now she stood outside her own home, afraid to go back in. She thought about Martin's voice on the phone. Too quick. Too defensive. She thought about the renovation 2 years ago. How proud he'd been of the work. She thought about the exhaustion, the headaches, the way her body had been failing her for months. And for the first time in her life, she wondered if her own child wanted her dead. The Texas sun climbed higher, casting short shadows across the lawn. But Dora felt cold all the way through. The diner sat on a busy corner 2 miles from Dora's house. Red vinyl booths lined the windows. The smell of coffee and bacon grease hung thick in the air. A ceiling fan turned slowly overhead, stirring the warm Texas air. Dora sat across from Ricardo in a corner booth. Her hands wrapped around a white coffee mug, but she hadn't taken a sip. The ceramic felt cold against her palms. Around them, the lunch crowd filled most of the tables. Conversations blended into a low hum. Forks clinked against plates. The cash register chimed, but Dora heard none of it. Her world had shrunk to this booth, this man, and the words he was about to say. Ricardo leaned forward, his voice low. Mrs. Miller, this wasn't built overnight. Someone planned it. Dora's chest tightened. Planned to hurt me? The words came out as a whisper. Why? Ricardo glanced around the diner, then back at her. I'm not an expert, ma'am, but I've seen enough to know this kind of setup takes time. Money. Knowledge of your house. He pulled a small notepad from his shirt pocket and set it on the table. His handwriting was neat, precise. Columns of numbers filled the page. Your house, he said quietly. What's it worth? Dora blinked. I don't know exactly. Maybe 300,000? Ricardo shook his head. Property values in your area have gone up. Way up. I'd guess closer to 450. Dora stared at the numbers. The house had been worth so little when she and Harold bought it. A young couple's dream in a quiet neighborhood. Now it was worth more than they'd ever imagined. Then there's your saving, Ricardo continued. Your husband's life insurance. Retirement accounts. Dora's hands trembled. How do you know about... I don't, Ricardo said gently. But someone does. Someone who knows exactly what you're worth. He pointed to a number at the bottom of the page. $850,000. This is just a guess, he said. But I'd bet it's close. Dora looked at the number. It seemed impossible. She'd never thought of herself as wealthy. Just comfortable. Secure. Harold had worked his whole life to make sure she'd be okay after he was gone. But that's my family's inheritance, she said. Martin and Rachel. They wouldn't us. Noreen. She stopped. The words felt impossible to finish. Ricardo's expression was kind but firm. Ma'am, I'm not saying they would. I'm just saying someone knows your finances. Someone with access to your house. Someone who knew exactly where to put that device. Dora's mind raced. She thought about the basement renovation 2 years ago. Martin had been so involved, so careful about every detail. He'd even drawn diagrams of the new pipe layout. The timeline, she said slowly. Ma'am? Rachel moved back home 8 months ago. Dora's voice was barely audible. Right around the time I started feeling sick. Ricardo nodded. He didn't look surprised. Dora remembered the day Rachel had arrived. Suitcases in hand, tears on her cheeks. A bad breakup, she'd said. She needed time to get back on her feet. Dora had been so happy to have her daughter home again. She knows I take naps in the afternoon, Dora whispered. She knows when I'm in my room. The coffee in her mug had gone cold. She set it down with shaking hands. What about your son? Ricardo asked. Martin? Dora's chest ached. He's been stressed lately. Money troubles. His construction business hasn't been doing well. That was an understatement. Martin had borrowed money to expand his company last year. But work had dried up. Contracts had fallen through. She'd heard him on the phone with creditors, his voice tight with worry. He asked me about taking out a loan against the house, Dora said. I told him no. I said Harold wanted me to keep it secure. Ricardo wrote something in his notepad. When was this? 6 months ago. Maybe 7. Right after Rachel moved in. Right before Dora's health started failing. The pieces fit together like a puzzle she didn't want to solve. A waitress approached their table, coffee pot in hand. More coffee? Ricardo shook his head. We're good, thanks. The waitress moved on. The diner buzzed around them. Normal people living normal lives. Dora envied them. Mrs. Miller, Ricardo said quietly. You need to stay somewhere safe. Tonight. Dora looked up at him. His face was serious, concerned. Safe? A hotel. Somewhere they won't think to look for you. The word they hit her like a slap. They won her children, the people she'd given life to, raised, loved unconditionally. I can't believe this, she said. But even as the words left her mouth, she knew she did believe it. Deep down, she'd known something was wrong for months. The way Martin avoided her eyes when he visited. The way Rachel seemed impatient, always checking her phone, always somewhere else in her mind. I know, Ricardo said, but we need to be smart. If they realize you know about the device. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Dora thought about going home, walking into her kitchen, her living room, her bedroom, the places that had felt safe for 40 years. Now they felt like a trap. There's a motel on Highway 6, Ricardo said. Nothing fancy, but it's clean. Safe. Dora nodded slowly. She felt numb, disconnected from her own body. What about my things? We'll figure that out tomorrow. Right now, you just need to be somewhere they can't find you. Ricardo signaled the waitress for the check. He paid in cash, leaving a generous tip. Dora noticed these details without really caring. Her mind was elsewhere, trying to process what her life had become in the span of a few hours. They walked to his van in silence. The parking lot was hot, the asphalt soft under their feet. Dora got into the passenger seat. The vinyl was warm against her back. Ricardo started the engine and pulled onto the main road. Traffic was light. The motel was only 10 minutes away. Mrs. Miller, he said as they drove. There's something else you need to know. Dora looked at him. His hands were tight on the steering wheel. If they realize you know about this, they might rush their plan. The words hung in the air between them. Rush their plan. Make it happen faster. Before she could tell anyone. Before she could protect herself. The motel appeared ahead of them. A single-story building with blue doors and a neon sign. Cars parked in front of numbered rooms. It looked clean but tired. The kind of place where people stayed when they had nowhere else to go. Ricardo pulled into the office parking lot. I'll get the room under my name. Pay cash. Dora nodded. She clutched her purse against her chest. Inside were her credit cards, her identification, photos of Harold, everything that proved who she was. But sitting in this parking lot, she felt like a stranger to herself. Ricardo came back with a key. Room 12. He drove to the far end of the building and parked in front of a blue door. Keep the curtains closed, he said. Don't answer the door unless you know it's me. Dora got out of the van. The key felt heavy in her hand. She looked at the door, then back at Ricardo. What if they come looking for me? Ricardo's expression was grim. Then we'll know for sure. Dora unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was small but clean. A double bed with a floral bedspread. A table and 2 chairs. A television mounted on the wall. The air conditioner hummed in the corner. Ricardo set her purse on the table. I'll call you tonight. Check in. What about the police? Tomorrow, he said. We'll call them tomorrow. Once we have that sample tested. He moved toward the door, then stopped. Mrs. Miller? She looked at him. I'm sorry, he said. I'm sorry this is happening to you. Then he was gone. Dora heard his van start and drive away. She locked the door behind him and drew the curtains closed. The room fell into dim shadows. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked around. A bedside lamp cast yellow light across the floral bedspread. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and old carpet. For the first time in 40 years, she was homeless. She opened her purse and pulled out her phone. 3 missed calls from Martin. 2 text messages from Rachel asking where she was. Dora turned the phone off and put it back in her purse. She sat in the gathering darkness, clutching her purse like a lifeline, and tried not to think about the children she'd raised turning into strangers who wanted her dead. Night fell over the motel like a heavy blanket. Dora sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the drawn curtains. The air conditioner hummed in the corner, cycling on and off every few minutes. The sound had become familiar, almost comforting. She tried to sleep but couldn't. Every small noise made her heart race. A car door slamming. Footsteps in the hallway. The distant sound of traffic on the highway. Her phone sat silent on the bedside table. She'd turned it back on an hour ago, just to check the time. No missed calls. No new messages. The quiet felt worse than noise. At 11:30, the phone buzzed. A text message? Unknown number. We know where you are. Dora's hands shook as she read the words. The message was simple, direct. No signature. But something about the tone felt familiar. Cold. Efficient. Like Martin when he was angry. She set the phone down and backed away from it. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. The room felt smaller suddenly. The walls closer together. Another buzz. Another message. Room 12, blue door. Ricardo's van in the parking lot. Dora's breath caught. They weren't just threatening her. They were watching her. Right now. She moved to the window and peered through a gap in the curtains. The parking lot was mostly empty. A few cars scattered under the yellow streetlights. Ricardo's white van sat 3 spaces away, exactly where he'd left it. No movement, no signs of life. But they were out there. She knew it. A soft knock came at the door. 3 taps, polite and rhythmic. The kind of knock a neighbor might make. Friendly, unthreatening. Dora froze. Her chest tightened. The knock came again, slightly louder this time. She backed toward the bathroom, her bare feet silent on the carpet. The knock repeated. Patient. Persistent. Then she heard the back door open. The motel room had 2 entrances. The front door that faced the parking lot and a service door that opened onto the maintenance corridor behind the building. She'd noticed it earlier, but hadn't thought much about it. Now someone was coming through that back entrance. Mrs. Miller? Ricardo's voice low and urgent. We have to go. Now. Relief flooded through her. She turned toward his voice. Ricardo? He appeared in the doorway between the main room and the service corridor. His face was pale, his shirt rumpled. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool air conditioning. They followed my truck, he said. I saw them in my rearview mirror. 2 cars. The knocking at the front door stopped. How did they? Dora started. Doesn't matter, Ricardo interrupted. We need to leave. Through the back. Dora grabbed her purse from the table. Ricardo took her arm, gentle but firm, and guided her toward the service door. The corridor beyond was narrow and dimly lit. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The concrete floor was cold under her feet. They moved quickly but quietly. Ricardo led her past storage rooms and utility closets. The corridor smelled of cleaning supplies and damp concrete. At the far end, a heavy door marked emergency exit stood slightly ajar. Ricardo pushed it open carefully. Cool night air rushed in, carrying the scent of asphalt and car exhaust. The alley behind the motel was narrow, barely wide enough for a delivery truck. Dumpsters lined one side. The other side opened onto a parking lot for a closed restaurant. My truck's parked across the street, Ricardo whispered. We can He stopped. At the far end of the alley, a figure stepped into view. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark jacket. The streetlight behind him cast his face in shadow, but Dora knew that silhouette. Martin. He held something in his right hand. Metal caught the light. A wrench from his toolbox. The kind he used for plumbing work. Hello, Mom, he said quietly. Dora's legs went weak. She gripped Ricardo's arm for support. Martin walked toward them slowly, his footsteps echoing off the brick walls. Martin, she whispered. The name felt strange in her mouth. Foreign. We've been looking for you, he said. His voice was calm, conversational. Like they'd run into each other at the grocery store. Rachel's been worried. As if summoned by his words, another figure appeared behind them. Dora turned and saw her daughter stepping out of the shadows near the motel's back door. Rachel wore jeans and a dark sweater. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail. She looked younger than her 34 years. In her hand, she carried a small syringe. The plastic gleamed under the alley's dim lighting. Mom, Rachel said softly. Come home. You're confused. Dora looked from one child to the other. Martin with his wrench. Rachel with her syringe. They stood at opposite ends of the alley like sentries, blocking both exits. Mrs. Miller, Ricardo said quietly. Stay behind me. But there was nowhere to go. The alley walls were too high to climb. The dumpsters too heavy to move. They were trapped. Dora's mind raced back over the years. Martin as a little boy, scraping his knee and running to her for comfort. Rachel at 16, crying over her first heartbreak. The children she'd nursed through fevers and nightmares. The young adults she'd helped through college and career struggles. When had they become strangers? You were going to kill me, she said. The words came out as a whisper, but they carried in the still air. Rachel's face changed. The concerned daughter mask slipped away, revealing something harder underneath. Love and resentment twisted together in her expression. Don't be dramatic, Mom, Rachel said. It would have been peaceful. Like going to sleep. Martin took another step closer. You wouldn't have suffered. Dora stared at them. These people who shared her blood, her memories, her history. They were talking about her death like a business transaction. Why? The word escaped before she could stop it. Rachel's grip tightened on the syringe. Love doesn't pay debt, Mom. The words hit Dora like a physical blow. She stumbled backward, bumping into Ricardo. He steadied her with one hand, but his eyes never left Martin. The house is worth $500,000, Martin said. Maybe more. Your savings, Dad's insurance money. We calculated it all. You calculated? Dora's voice trailed off. They'd done math, made spreadsheets, planned her murder like a home renovation project. We tried other ways, Rachel said. Asked for loans, for help. But you always said no. I said be responsible, Dora replied. Her voice was stronger now. I said don't spend money you don't have. Martin's face hardened. Easy to say when you're sitting on almost $1 million. That money was for your inheritance, Dora said. For after I was gone naturally. When? Rachel snapped. You're 69 and healthy. You could live another 20 years. We need help now. The raw selfishness in her daughter's voice made Dora sick. She thought about all the sacrifices she and Harold had made. The small house they'd stayed in when they could have upgraded. The vacations they'd skipped to put money in savings. The cheap clothes and store-brand groceries. All so their children would be secure after they were gone. The device in the basement, Ricardo said suddenly. How long has it been running? Martin shrugged. 6 months. Maybe 7. You've been poisoning her for 6 months? Not poisoning, Rachel corrected. Weakening. Making her sick enough that a heart attack or stroke would seem natural. Dora's knees buckled. 6 months of slow torture. 6 months of feeling tired and confused and weak. 6 months of wondering if she was losing her mind. While her children watched and waited for her to die, Ricardo's hand moved to his phone. I'm calling. Martin raised the wrench. I don't think so. But before anyone could move, the night exploded with sound. Sirens, high and piercing, coming closer. Red and blue lights painted the alley walls. The sirens grew louder, then stopped abruptly. Car doors slammed. Footsteps pounded on asphalt. Police, drop your weapons. Voices echoed from both ends of the alley. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, blinding and disorienting. Martin shielded his eyes with his free hand. Rachel took a step backward. Drop the wrench, drop the syringe. Hands where we can see them. The commands came rapid fire from multiple directions. Officers moved into the alley from both exits, weapons drawn. Their flashlights created a web of crossing beams. Martin let the wrench fall. It hit the concrete with a metallic clang. Rachel set the syringe down carefully, her hands shaking. On the ground, now! Both children dropped to their knees, then lay face down on the alley floor. Officers moved in quickly, handcuffs gleaming in the flashlight beams. Dora watched her son and daughter being arrested, their faces pressed against the dirty concrete, their hands cuffed behind their backs. The children she'd raised, the people she'd loved most in the world, being read their rights. An officer approached her and Ricardo. Ma'am, are you Mrs. Miller? Dora nodded. She couldn't speak. Her throat felt raw, though she didn't remember screaming. We got your call, the officer said to Ricardo. Good timing. You called them? Dora asked. Ricardo nodded. While we were running, told them what was happening. The officer helped Dora to a patrol car. She sat in the back seat, watching as Martin and Rachel were loaded into separate vehicles. Neither of them looked at her. Their faces were blank, resigned. The sirens started again as the police cars pulled away. The red and blue lights faded into the distance, taking her children with them. The alley fell quiet. Only Ricardo remained, standing beside the patrol car where Dora sat. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Dora looked up at him, the stranger who had saved her life, who had cared more about her welfare than her own family. Thank you, she whispered. The night air was cool against her face. She could smell the dumpsters, the exhaust from the police cars, the lingering scent of fear and betrayal. But underneath it all, she caught something else. Freedom. For the first time in months, she could breathe clean air. The patrol car moved through empty streets. Streetlights painted yellow circles on the asphalt. Dora sat in the back seat, watching the familiar neighborhoods pass by. But her mind wasn't in the present. It drifted backward, pulled by memory and grief. She saw Martin at 8 years old. Summer afternoon, sawdust in the air. His small hands gripping a hammer while Frank guided his movements. They were building a treehouse in the backyard oak. Martin's face was serious with concentration. Frank's voice was patient, encouraging. Measure twice, cut once, Frank had said. Martin nodded solemnly. He wanted to do everything right, to make his father proud. Now Dora wondered when that earnest boy had learned to measure her life instead of wood. The memory shifted. Rachel at 12, standing in the kitchen with food coloring bottles lined up like a rainbow. Her first chemistry set had been a Christmas gift. She'd mixed colors for hours, watching red turn to purple, blue fade to green. Her eyes had sparkled with discovery. Look, Mom, she'd whispered. I can make anything change. Even then, Dora realized now, Rachel had been fascinated by transformation, by changing one thing into another. The patrol car turned a corner. Dora's reflection stared back from the window. An old woman with silver hair and tired eyes. She barely recognized herself. Sunday dinners came back to her in fragments. The dining table set with her mother's china. Jazz music drifting from the radio in the kitchen, Frank carving the roast while the children talked over each other. Martin describing his Little League games. Rachel explaining her science projects. The house had been full of voices then, full of life. Frank would lean back in his chair after dinner, coffee cup in hand. The afternoon light would slant through the windows, golden and warm. The dishes could wait. The work could wait. These moments were what mattered. Family's about work, not words, he used to say. Dora had thought she understood what he meant. Family required effort, sacrifice, daily choices to put others first. She'd worked to keep that family together, packed lunches every morning, attended every school play and parent conference, stayed up with sick children and worried teenagers. But she'd misunderstood something fundamental. She'd thought work meant giving everything you had. Frank had meant work meant everyone contributing, everyone caring for everyone else. Her children had stopped working long ago. After Frank's funeral, Dora had stood in their bedroom, surrounded by sympathy flowers and casserole dishes from neighbors. The house felt too quiet without his voice, too empty without his presence. She'd made a promise that day to keep the house exactly as it was, to preserve the memories they'd built together, to stay until the day she joined him. "I won't let them tear down what we built," she'd whispered to his photograph. Now that same house had become her tomb. The rooms where she'd raised her children had been turned into an execution chamber. The basement where Frank had taught Martin to use tools had become a place of poison and betrayal. The irony was bitter as medicine. She remembered Rachel's divorce 2 years ago, the tears in the lawyer's office, the shame of a failed marriage. Dora had held her daughter's hand and promised everything would be okay. "Don't worry about money, Mom," Rachel had said afterward. "I'll figure it out." Such a kind thing to say. Such a thoughtful gesture. Now Dora heard the subtext, the calculation beneath the comfort. Rachel hadn't been worried about being a burden. She'd been planning to solve her money problems permanently. Martin's voice echoed from a year ago. He'd been explaining the basement renovation. Blueprints spread across the kitchen table. His finger traced the new pipe routes with professional confidence. "Trust me with the renovations, Mom. I know exactly what needs to be done." She'd been so proud of his expertise, so grateful for his help. Every kindness had been a rehearsal for betrayal. The patrol car stopped at a red light. Dora looked out at a 24-hour diner. The neon sign buzzed and flickered. Through the windows, she could see a few late-night customers. A trucker drinking coffee, a young couple sharing pie. Normal people living normal lives. She envied them their ordinary problems. The light turned green. They drove on through the sleeping city. Dora's reflection wavered in the glass, ghost-like and fragile. She thought about the children she'd raised, the bedtime stories and scraped knees, the proud moments and worried nights. Had she spoiled them, made them too comfortable, failed to teach them the value of honest work, or had something else gone wrong? Some fundamental flaw she'd never noticed? Martin's serious face at 8, learning to use a hammer. Rachel's wonder at 12, discovering chemistry. Where had those children gone? When had love become a calculation? When had family become a business transaction? The questions had no answers, only the hollow ache of loss and the bitter taste of betrayal. The patrol car continued through the night, carrying Dora away from everything she'd thought she knew about her children, her family, and herself. Dawn broke gray and cold over the Houston suburbs. Police cars lined Dora's driveway like mourners at a funeral. Yellow tape stretched across the front porch. Officers moved in and out of the house carrying cameras and evidence bags. Dora sat in Detective Chen's unmarked sedan, watching strangers examine her home. The detective was a small woman with sharp eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. She'd been kind but thorough in her questions. "Mrs. Miller," Detective Chen said quietly, "we're going to need to process the house for several days." Dora nodded. She understood. Her home was a crime scene now. Ricardo approached the car, carrying his toolbox and a manila folder. His face was serious but determined. He'd been working with the forensics team since 5 in the morning. Detective Chen rolled down the window. "What have you got?" Ricardo opened the folder. Inside were dozens of photographs, time-stamped and numbered. The basement device from multiple angles. Close-ups of pipes and connections. The chemical tanks with their mysterious contents. "Took these yesterday before we called you," Ricardo said. "Shows everything exactly as I found it." Detective Chen studied the photos. Her expression darkened with each image. "Professional installation?" "Had to be," Ricardo replied. "This wasn't some amateur job. Whoever did this knew plumbing, electrical, HVAC systems." A forensics technician emerged from the house carrying several sealed evidence bags. Inside one, Dora could see a dark liquid sample. In another, pieces of tubing and electronic components. Chemical analysis will take 48 hours, the technician told Detective Chen. But the field test shows organic compounds. Definitely not water treatment. Dora's stomach turned. For months, she'd been breathing poison, sleeping in contaminated air, slowly dying while her children watched and waited. Another officer approached with a laptop bag. Found this in the daughter's room, he said. Password protected, but tech says they can crack it. Detective Chen took the bag. Anything else? Notebook, the officer replied. He handed over a composition book with a black and white marbled cover. The kind students used in high school. Detective Chen opened it. Her eyebrows rose. She read silently for a moment, then looked at Dora. Mrs. Miller, I need you to listen carefully. This notebook contains detailed records of your health over the past 8 months. Dora's hands clenched in her lap. Records? Detective Chen read from the first page. Day 12, headaches persist. Day 18, dizziness increasing. Day 25, appetite declining. Each entry was written in Rachel's neat handwriting. Dates, symptoms, observations. Like a medical chart. Like a laboratory experiment. They were documenting me, Dora said. Her voice shook but stayed steady. Detective Chen continued reading. Day 43, confusion episodes more frequent. Day 51, balance problems noticeable. Day 67, Dr. Morrison visit scheduled. Dora remembered that doctor's appointment. She'd been worried about her symptoms, but Dr. Morrison had dismissed them as normal aging. Rachel had driven her to the clinic, had sat in the waiting room, reading magazines. Now Dora wondered if Rachel had been disappointed when the doctor found nothing seriously wrong. There are over 200 entries, Detective Chen said quietly. Your daughter documented your decline with scientific precision. A crime scene photographer emerged from the house, camera bag slung over his shoulder. Behind him came 2 more technicians carrying Martin's toolbox and several plastic containers. Detective Chen's radio crackled. Chen here. We've got the son's phone records, a voice said through the static. Multiple transfers to something called Rodriguez Construction Services. How much? $12,000 over 6 months. Cash payments. Detective Chen looked at Ricardo. You know Rodriguez Construction? Ricardo shook his head. Never heard of them. But 12 grand for an installation like this? That's about right. Run Rodriguez through the system, Detective Chen said into her radio. I want background, licensing, everything. She turned back to Dora. Mrs. Miller, did your son ever mention hiring outside contractors for work in your basement? No, Dora replied. He said he was doing everything himself. Another lie. Another deception. Martin had hired professionals to build her death chamber while pretending to help her maintain the house. A van from the Financial Crimes Division pulled up behind the police cars. 2 investigators in dark suits got out, carrying briefcases and tablets. Detective Chen waved them over. What do we have? The lead investigator asked. He was tall and thin, with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. Detective Chen handed him Rachel's notebook. Attempted murder for financial gain. Mother's worth approximately $850,000. The investigator flipped through the notebook pages. His expression grew grimmer with each entry. This is premeditation. Documentation of the victim's decline. Proof of intent. And the son paid $12,000 to have the device installed, Detective Chen added. Joint conspiracy, the investigator said. This just became a federal case. Dora watched the investigators spread documents across the hood of their van. Bank records, insurance policies, property assessments. Her life reduced to numbers on paper. But these numbers told a story. They proved what her children had done. They turned suspicion into certainty. A forensics technician approached carrying a metal briefcase. Inside, nestled in foam padding, were several glass vials containing clear liquid. Air samples from the bedroom, he told Detective Chen. Field tests showed traces of hydrogen sulfide and carbon monoxide. Low concentrations but consistent exposure over months would cause exactly the symptoms she described. Detective Chen nodded. Enough to kill her? Eventually, the technician replied. Maybe 6 more months. Would have looked like natural organ failure. Dora's chest tightened. 6 more months. Her children had been patient. Methodical. They'd planned to watch her slowly suffocate while pretending to care for her. The daughter's employment records, another investigator called out. She worked at Brennan Chemical Labs until last year. Had access to industrial compounds. What kind of compounds? Hydrogen sulfide generators. Used for oil field applications. Easy to modify for residential installation. The pieces clicked together like puzzle parts. Rachel's chemistry background. Martin's construction knowledge. Their combined access to materials and expertise. They'd turned their skills into weapons against their own mother. Detective Chen's radio buzzed again. Rodriguez Construction is a shell company. Registered 6 months ago, dissolved last week. Fake address, burner phone. Martin set up a dummy company to pay himself, Detective Chen explained to Dora. Laundered the money to make it look legitimate. The financial investigator looked up from his paperwork. Smart, actually. If the murder had worked, this would have looked like routine home maintenance expenses. But not smart enough, Detective Chen said. 2 more police cars arrived. Officers got out and walked toward the house with evidence boxes and photography equipment. The investigation was expanding, becoming more thorough. Dora watched them work. These strangers who cared more about justice than her own children, who treated her life as something worth protecting. Mrs. Miller, Detective Chen said gently, we'll need you to testify. When this goes to trial? Dora nodded. The thought of facing Martin and Rachel in court terrified her. But they'd made their choice when they decided her death was worth more than her life. An officer emerged from the house carrying a box of documents. Financial statements, insurance papers, legal documents. Dora's entire financial life in a cardboard box. The suspects are invoking their right to remain silent, Detective Chen's radio announced. Neither one is talking. Detective Chen looked at Dora. Their silence is actually helpful. No lies to untangle. No false alibis to check. The evidence speaks for itself. And it did speak. The notebook spoke of calculated cruelty. The financial record spoke of greed. The chemical analysis spoke of slow murder. Their silence became their confession. Dora took a deep breath. For the first time in months, the air tasted clean, honest, free of poison and deception. She was alive. She was safe. She was surrounded by people who wanted to protect her rather than kill her. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the gray clouds. Light flooded the suburban street, illuminating the police cars and investigators and all the evidence of her children's betrayal. But it also illuminated something else. Her own strength, her own worth, the simple fact that she deserved to live. Dora Miller was going to survive this. She was going to testify. She was going to see justice done. And she was going to breathe free air for as long as she had left. The federal courthouse stood like a monument to justice in downtown Houston. Glass and steel reached toward the gray October sky. American flags hung motionless in the still air. Dora climbed the concrete steps slowly, her hand gripping the metal railing. Ricardo walked beside her, carrying a folder of evidence photographs. His best shirt was pressed and clean. His tie was navy blue conservative. He'd taken the morning off work to be here for the sentencing. Inside, the courtroom smelled of old wood and floor wax. The ceiling was high, painted white, with fluorescent lights that hummed quietly overhead. Spectator benches filled most of the space. The judge's bench loomed at the front, dark and imposing. Dora took her seat in the front row. Behind her, she could hear reporters whispering, their notebooks ready. This case had attracted attention. Attempted murder for inheritance money. Children poisoning their own mother. The kind of story that made people check their locks at night. At 9:30 sharp, the bailiff called the court to order. Judge Martinez entered through a side door, her black robes flowing behind her. She was a small woman with silver hair and sharp eyes. Her expression was stern but fair. Be seated, the bailiff announced. The defense table sat on the left side of the courtroom. Martin wore a gray suit that looked too big for him. His face was pale, his hands folded in his lap. Rachel sat beside him in a dark blue dress. Her hair was pulled back severely. Neither of them looked at Dora. The prosecution table buzzed with quiet activity. Assistant District Attorney Williams shuffled through documents. Her team had spent 3 months building this case. Every piece of evidence cataloged and verified. The defendants will rise for sentencing, Judge Martinez said. Martin and Rachel stood slowly. Their lawyer, a tired-looking man in his 50s, stood with them. He'd tried to negotiate plea deals for months. His clients had refused every offer. They wanted to take their chances at trial. It had been a mistake. Judge Martinez opened a thick folder and began reading. Martin James Miller and Rachel Ann Miller, you have been found guilty on all counts. Conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree. Elder abuse resulting in bodily harm. Financial fraud in anticipation of inheritance. Her voice was steady, professional. But Dora could hear the disgust underneath. The defense has claimed that Mrs. Dora Miller suffered from confusion and delusion, that her testimony was unreliable due to her advanced age. Judge Martinez looked directly at Martin and Rachel. The evidence tells a different story. The prosecution has presented a timeline of methodical, calculated murder. Financial records showing $12,000 in payments to a shell company. Chemical analysis proving the presence of industrial toxins in the victim's living space. She paused, letting the words sink in. This court finds the defendant's actions to be premeditated cruelty under the guise of familial care. The courtroom was silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Dora could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. Behind her, someone coughed quietly. Martin James Miller, Judge Martinez continued, you are sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without possibility of parole for 15 years. Martin's knees buckled slightly. His lawyer steadied him with one hand. Rachel Ann Miller, you are sentenced to 20 years in federal prison without possibility of parole for 12 years. Rachel's face crumpled. She pressed her hand to her mouth, but no sound came out. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. Dora watched her children receive their sentences. She felt no joy in their punishment, only a deep, hollow sadness for the family that had died long before this courtroom drama. Before we adjourn, Judge Martinez said, I want to recognize Mr. Ricardo Medina. Ricardo stood up in the gallery, his face flushed with surprise. Mr. Medina's quick thinking and moral courage saved Mrs. Miller's life. His willingness to come forward prevented a terrible crime from reaching completion. The court commends his actions and recommends him for citizen recognition. Scattered applause filled the courtroom. Ricardo nodded awkwardly and sat back down. Mrs. Miller, Judge Martinez said, the court invites you to make a victim impact statement if you choose. Dora rose slowly. The prosecutor had asked if she wanted to speak. She'd thought about it for weeks. What could she say that the evidence hadn't already proven? But standing there, looking at her children's faces, she knew. Your Honor, Dora began. Her voice was quiet but clear. They didn't just try to take my money. They tried to erase me. She paused, gathering strength. For 8 months, I thought I was losing my mind. I thought my body was failing me naturally. I made peace with dying because I believed it was my time. Several jurors wiped their eyes. The courtroom was absolutely still, but it wasn't my time. It was their schedule. They decided when I should die, how I should die, and how much my death was worth. Dora's voice remained steady, but tears ran down her cheeks. I loved them more than my own life. I would have given them everything I had if they'd just asked. But they wanted more than money. They wanted me gone. She looked directly at Martin and Rachel. They stared at the floor, unable to meet her eyes. I forgive them because that's what mothers do. But I will never understand how love became so worthless to them. She sat back down. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of quiet crying. Judge Martinez adjourned the court. The bailiffs led Martin and Rachel away in handcuffs. They shuffled toward the side door without looking back. Dora watched until they disappeared. It was over. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon sun broke through the clouds. The October air was crisp and clean. Dora stood on the steps, breathing deeply. Ricardo waited beside her, patient and kind. Mrs. Miller, he said quietly, can I give you a ride home? Dora looked back at the glass building. Inside, justice had been served. Her children would spend decades in prison. The truth had been told and believed. But justice felt heavier than she'd expected. Not the light, free feeling she'd imagined. More like carrying a weight that was necessary but not pleasant. It's over, Frank, she whispered to the sky. They can't touch the air anymore. Ricardo offered his arm. Together, they walked down the courthouse steps toward his truck. The parking meter had expired, but no ticket waited on the windshield. Even small mercies felt significant today. Dora got into the passenger seat and buckled her seatbelt. Ricardo started the engine. The radio played soft jazz, the kind Frank used to love on Sunday afternoons. Where to? Ricardo asked. Dora thought about her house. The basement had been cleaned and the device removed. New air filters installed throughout. The police tape was gone. It was safe to live in again. But it would never feel like home. Anywhere the air is honest, she said. Ricardo nodded. He understood. They drove through the Houston streets, past office buildings and shopping centers, past normal people living normal lives. The traffic was light. The sky was clearing. Dora rolled down her window and let the wind blow through her silver hair. For the first time in almost a year, she could breathe without wondering if someone was trying to kill her. Justice felt heavy, but it was breathable. And for now, that was enough. 6 months later, the morning sun painted Galveston Bay in shades of gold and blue. Seagulls cried overhead, their voices mixing with the steady rhythm of waves against the pier. The salt breeze carried stories of distant places and clean horizons. Dora Miller stood on the small balcony of her apartment, coffee mug in hand. The building was old but well-maintained, with white clapboard siding and green shutters. Her unit faced east toward the water. Every sunrise was a gift she hadn't expected to receive. The air tasted of salt and possibility, not a trace of chemicals or deception. She'd sold the Houston house 3 months ago. The real estate agent had been honest about the property's history. A crime scene, he'd called it. Some buyers wouldn't consider it, but others saw only the solid construction and good bones. The money from the sale had been enough to buy this small apartment outright. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with windows that opened wide to catch the sea breeze. Everything she needed and nothing more. The phone rang inside. Dora glanced at the caller ID and smiled. Ricard. He called every Sunday morning at 8:30. Regular as clockwork, reliable as sunrise. Morning, she said, settling into her favorite chair by the window. Morning, Mrs. Miller. How's the coffee today? Perfect, she replied. Still watching the boats come in? It had become their ritual. He'd drive down from Houston after church, arriving around noon. They'd share lunch on the balcony and talk about ordinary things. The weather, the news, his latest plumbing jobs. Never about the basement, never about the trial, never about the children who tried to kill her. Some wounds healed better in silence. Dora finished her coffee and dressed for the day. Blue slacks and a white blouse. Comfortable shoes for walking. The Galveston Public Library opened at 10, and the children's reading hour started at 10:30. She'd been volunteering there for 2 months now. Mrs. Patterson, the head librarian, had been grateful for the help. Too many programs, not enough staff. Dora's soft voice and patient manner worked well with the younger children. The walk to the library took 15 minutes along tree-lined streets. Victorian houses sat behind wrought iron fences, their gingerbread trim painted in cheerful colors. Tourists photographed the architecture while locals went about their morning routines. Dora waved to Mr. Chen, who was watering his garden. He'd lived on this street for 40 years, had seen the island weather hurricanes and rebuilds. He understood the value of starting over. The library smelled of old books and floor polish, familiar scents that reminded Dora of her childhood, when libraries had been safe harbors from an uncertain world. Good morning, Dora, Mrs. Patterson called from behind the circulation desk. The picture books are all set up in the children's corner. Dora nodded and made her way to the back of the building. The children's section was bright and colorful, with low shelves and cushioned reading areas. Murals of storybook characters decorated the walls. By 10:30, 8 children had gathered in the circle, ages 3 to 7 with their parents hovering nearby. Dora settled into the storytelling chair and opened the first book. Once upon a time, she began, there was a little bird who was afraid to fly. The children leaned forward, their eyes wide with anticipation. For the next hour, Dora read stories about brave mice and clever rabbits and children who discovered they were stronger than they'd ever imagined. When the session ended, a little girl with pigtails tugged on Dora's sleeve. Will you be here next week? She asked. Of course, Dora replied. I'll be here. The certainty in her own voice surprised her. For months after the trial, she'd lived day by day, uncertain about everything. Now she could make promises again. Small ones, but promises nonetheless. After lunch, Ricardo helped her hang a picture on the living room wall. It wasn't a photograph of family or friends. It was a framed print of the newspaper article about the case. The headline read, Houston woman survives children's murder plot. Below the headline was a photograph of the basement device. Metal tubes and electronic components arranged with deadly precision. The thing that had nearly killed her, preserved now as a reminder rather than a trauma. You sure about this? Ricardo asked, holding the frame steady. I'm sure, Dora replied. I don't want to forget what survival looks like. He hung the picture on the wall opposite her favorite chair. Not hidden away, but not dominating the room either. Just there, honest and real. The mail had arrived while they were at lunch. 3 bills, 2 advertisements, and a letter with familiar handwriting. Rachel's return address in the upper left corner. Federal Correctional Institution, Beaumont. Dora held the envelope for a moment, feeling its weight. Then she walked to the kitchen and filed it in the drawer, with the other unopened letters from her daughter. 7 so far. She didn't read them, but she couldn't bring herself to throw them away either. Martin had stopped writing after the first month, but he called collect from prison every few weeks. Dora always let the calls go to voicemail. She'd listen to his voice sometimes, checking for genuine remorse or just more manipulation. So far, she'd heard only the latter. Ricardo stayed until sunset, helping her water the small herb garden on the balcony. Basil and rosemary and thyme, plants that smelled like hope when she brushed against them. After he left, Dora made herself a simple dinner, grilled fish and steamed vegetables. She ate on the balcony, watching the fishing boats return to harbor. Their lights bobbed on the dark water like fallen stars. The night sounds were different here. No traffic, no sirens, just waves and wind and the distant cry of night birds. Sometimes she heard laughter from the restaurants along the pier, the sound of people enjoying life without fear. At 10 o'clock, she prepared for bed. The apartment grew quiet except for the steady rhythm of the ocean. She'd been afraid of silence once, in those terrible months when every sound might have been death creeping closer. Now silence was a friend, the absence of machines designed to kill her. The absence of footsteps in the basement. The absence of children planning her funeral. She woke once during the night, as she often did. Not from nightmares, but from the simple pleasure of breathing clean air. The window was open, and the salt breeze stirred the curtains. She lay in the darkness, listening to the waves and smiling the kind of smile that comes after surviving a storm. In the morning, she would read to more children. She would tend her herbs and watch the boats. She would answer Ricardo's call and maybe walk to the beach. Simple things. Honest things. Life measured in moments instead of money. She rose from bed and walked to the balcony. The moon hung low over the water, casting a silver path across the waves. The air was cool and clean, tasting of salt and freedom. "The air's finally mine again," she whispered to the night. The words carried on the breeze, mixing with the sound of waves and the cry of gulls. They dissolved into the darkness like a prayer answered, a debt finally paid. Dora Miller had survived her children's attempt to erase her. She'd found justice in courtrooms and peace by the sea. She'd learned that family was about choice, not blood. That home was where you could breathe without fear. The waves continued their eternal rhythm. The moon traced its path across the sky. And in a small apartment overlooking Galveston Bay, a 70-year-old woman slept peacefully, surrounded by air that belonged only to her.